What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Syracuse Orange are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Syracuse did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Syracuse. My projection for this team was 7-5, and then my prediction for them was a little bit different. I had this team going 8-4. A lot of people were not high on Syracuse last year, but I was. This was a veteran experienced team, and then you had Kyle McCord coming in, the transfer quarterback, and he just had a very phenomenal season. Came right in and fit into the system pretty well for them. Their regular season record was 9-3, so Syracuse won 9 games in the regular season, but if you count their bowl game victory, this team went 10-3 overall last year, so a 10-win season for Syracuse in 2024. Taking a look at their schedule from last year, you look at who they played in the non-conference, and this is one of the more easiest schedules that we've seen in the country from last year. Looking at the non-conference, they played Ohio, Holy Cross, UNLV on the road, and then UConn. So this was one of the easiest schedules in the non-conference from 2024, but you look at UNLV, that kind of ended up being a very tough game there for this Syracuse team because UNLV was not a bad team at the Group of 5 level in the Mountain West, and that game, of course, went into overtime. And Syracuse, though, managed to win that game by 3. Then you look at their ACC schedule. We'll start with their home schedule first. They played Georgia Tech, Stanford, Virginia Tech, and Miami as well. They defeated Georgia Tech, but they ended up losing to Stanford. That was kind of a disappointing loss there. That might be the worst loss that they had here on this schedule from last year, was, of course, losing to Stanford there on a Friday night. And then also you had, like I said, Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech ended up not being as good as we thought they were going to be, but Miami, that was a big win there for Syracuse to end out the season. They, of course, ruined Miami's chances of course, winning or actually go into the ACC championship as well. Then you look at their road schedule. It wasn't all too bad for them. They played NC State, Pittsburgh on the road, Boston College, and then also California. They ended up losing to Pittsburgh and Boston College. Pittsburgh actually was really good in the first half of the year, and then they got into the second half of the season and weren't really good for the rest of the way. But yeah, Boston College ended up being a pretty tough loss there, and then Cal, obviously having to travel out west, that was a big game there, but Syracuse was able to win it. So yeah, this was a pretty easy schedule for 2024. The schedule for this year is a little bit tougher compared to last season. This is their schedule coming up for 2025. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Syracuse plays in the non-conference for this season. So you look at their non-conference schedule, they will play, of course, Tennessee out of the SEC, a game that's going to be in Atlanta, of course, on a neutral site field. Yeah, that's going to be a pretty exciting non-conference game. Tennessee, of course, making the playoff last year, and it's a battle of orange bloods here going at it in Atlanta. And then you got UConn again, and they will play UConn again at home again. So they do play the Huskies again, and then they play Colgate, an FCS team, and then they play on the road at Notre Dame. So you look at this non-conference schedule, pretty tougher compared to last year when you got 2 teams in Tennessee and Notre Dame that made it to the playoff last season. Yeah, those are going to be 2 tough games for Syracuse. 2 games that could be like probably clear underdogs in both of those games, but Tennessee, really don't know if we're going to I don't really know how good they're going to be. I'm assuming they're going to be really good, no doubt about it. But, yeah, that game is on a neutral site, so that does give Syracuse a chance. And then, of course, Notre Dame playing on the road, that's going to be a pretty tough one there for the Orange. But that's your non-conference schedule. It could be a lot worse, but it is a tougher non-conference schedule compared to last year. Let's now move on to the home schedule. In the ACC for Syracuse, they will play 4 home games in the conference this year. They'll play Duke, Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and Boston College. So you look at Duke. I mean, Duke obviously was a pretty big surprise team last year. That could be a pretty exciting game, even though it's at home for the Orange. Pittsburgh, a team that they got beat by last year. That'll be a revenge game here for Syracuse. North Carolina, that should be a pretty exciting game because, Bill Belichick is taking over down there for the Tar Heels. Again, I don't really want to go too far with North Carolina just yet, but that could be a pretty exciting game once we get into the late part of the season. And then you got Boston College, another team compared to Pittsburgh that they lost to from last year. So the home schedule is not too tough for Syracuse. So they got 4 home games in the ACC this year. And then we move on to the away schedule. The away schedule is kind of tougher compared to the home schedule, though. They will play on the road at Clemson, at SMU, at Georgia Tech, and then at Miami. So this is a very tough road schedule. Clemson, of course, in Death Valley, one of the toughest places to play in the ACC. Yeah, that's going to be a really tough one. And then they got SMU, the runner-ups of the conference championship from last year. Georgia Tech, obviously the Yellow Jackets are looking for revenge after that Syracuse loss from last year. And then Miami, oh boy, that's going to be a big game right there. They beat them last year at home. But yeah, Miami is definitely going to be ready for this one this time. They will have revenge on their minds here for Syracuse. They're not playing this one at the end of the season, but they will play them here on the road. So that's your away schedule. That's a very tough away schedule here in the ACC for Syracuse. And let's go back to the schedule now and go game by game now for Syracuse. And again, like I said, they're going to start things off with Tennessee here on August 30th. That should be a pretty exciting game there. And again, that game is going to be in Atlanta. There's a lot of games coming up in neutral site venues. You got this one here in Atlanta as well. You also got another game on Sunday before Labor Day. You also talked about it, some of these big games to start off the year. This is another one of those big games that probably could go either way. But yeah, Tennessee here in Atlanta on August 30th to kick off the season. Then you got UConn here on September 6th. Then they play Colgate actually here on a Friday on September the 12th, and those 2 games, of course, will be at home against UConn and Colgate. And then they play on the road to open up ACC play against Clemson on September 20th. Then they come back at home to play Duke on September 27th. Then on the road at SMU on October the 4th. And then they get a bye week here before playing a revenge game against Pittsburgh on October 18th. And it looks like that game is also, or actually it's not on a Friday, it's actually on the Saturday, never mind. But then they'll play Georgia Tech after that on October 25th. And then they actually play another weeknight game. This is their second weeknight game here on this schedule, but it's against an ACC opponent, and it's on Halloween. It's against North Carolina on October the 31st. This is going to be a big game right here, and it should be a pretty exciting atmosphere for this game, especially when it's on Halloween. And then their second bye week comes right before playing Miami on the road. That's a pretty good spot for a bye week there before playing on the road at Miami. Actually, it's not a bye week before playing Miami. It's actually right before Notre Dame, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's right before Notre Dame. They play them on the road as well on November 22nd. I'm getting the bye weeks a little bit mixed up. But, yeah, Miami and Notre Dame, back-to-back road games. Those will be very tough back-to-back road games, but you get a bye week in between those 2 games. So that's the good news there. And then Syracuse will close things out with Boston College on November 29th. So a tougher schedule compared to last year for Syracuse. Again, Tennessee in the non-conference, so is Notre Dame. And Notre Dame, of course, will be a road game, but Tennessee's on a neutral site field. Clemson, though, that game will be, of course, really tough on the road. And then you got Miami on the road as well, SMU on the road. Yeah, these are pretty tricky road games, in my opinion, for Syracuse, but Syracuse and Georgia Tech, pretty winnable games here for the Orange, but we'll see how good they are compared to last year in 2024. This is the scale I'll be using here as we get into the projection here for the Orange. Again, if it's a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much counted as an automatic loss in that percentage. 20% games in the Orange are going to be games where Syracuse will be a double-digit underdog by 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that point range. And then your 40% games in the yellow, those are games where Syracuse will be a clear underdog again by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points. And then we got 50-50 games. Those, of course, will stay in the white. Games that really could go either way. And then your 60% games in the purple are going to be games where Syracuse will be favored by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points. And then your 80% games in the blue will be games where Syracuse will be favored by a couple of touchdowns by double digits, 10 to 14 points. And then your automatic wins are pretty much at 99%. So we'll start with the easy wins here for Syracuse. The automatic wins here for 2025. I think you got a couple of them on here, UConn and Colgate. I think Syracuse definitely should be able to take care of business in both of these games. Look, I get it. UConn is probably closer to 90% than it is over 95%. I totally agree with that. You can make an argument that UConn should be, of course, maybe in the blue, but I'm going to stick with it here and put it in the green for right now, just because Syracuse is clearly the better team. But UConn looks like, they're on the rise, for the last few years. UConn used to be the worst team in the American athletic and football history, but now it seems like they're getting back on the rise as a program, and they were actually really good last year. So that could be a little bit of a tougher game, especially coming off a physical game against Tennessee from the last week. But yeah, Colgate, that's definitely over that 95 to 99% range. So yeah, Syracuse definitely should be able to win that one pretty easily. But it would be a big shock if Syracuse were to lose one or two of these games, but I just don't see that happening here for the Orange. So those are the two games where I think Syracuse will be favored by 17 or 20 plus points. But then you look at the rest of the schedule here. I don't have any games in the blue or the purple for Syracuse, but I do have a couple of games on here where I think they'll be about an underdog in, a clear underdog. I don't have any games in the red or orange, but I got two games on here in the yellow where I think Syracuse is going to be a clear underdog by 6 or 7 points, so about less than a touchdown, and those two games are on the road. Clemson and Notre Dame. These are two very talented teams. Syracuse definitely is not on the level of these two teams. Miami is also a talented team, but Syracuse, of course, beat them last year. That's the reason why it's a 50-50 game instead of being like a 6 or 7 point underdog in that game. So yeah, Syracuse will be a clear underdog in both of these games. And I look back at my Notre Dame projection and everything. I did say this was a 50-50 game back then for the Fighting Irish. But now when I look at these two teams, Notre Dame, I should have been not ahead of myself. I should have said that Notre Dame is clearly the more talented team. Notre Dame will be favored in this game, but only by 6 or 7 points. Again, just based off of how these teams finished from last year, Syracuse is definitely not really that far behind Notre Dame, and also maybe not that far behind Clemson, because Syracuse, it seems like they are heading in the right direction, but it seems like they're just like Illinois. They seem like, they're really good the next year, and then, of course, the next season they're not really good, and then they ended up being good again. So, yeah, Syracuse, that could probably be the case for them this year for 2025. But, yeah, these two games, you look at them, Syracuse, I think, will be clear underdogs in both of these games by 6 or 7 points, so by about a touchdown, somewhere in that particular range. And then, like I said, the rest of the games on here are 50-50 games. They can all really go either way. Tennessee, because that's a neutral site game, that's pretty much why it's a 50-50 game. Those neutral site games are really tough to figure out, to be honest. And then Duke, SMU, Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and Boston College, all pretty even matchups. And then Miami on the road. I know Syracuse, should be an underdog in this game, but Syracuse beat Miami last year, and I know Boston College, Syracuse should be favored in that game as well, but Boston College beat Syracuse last year, and so did Pittsburgh, so yeah, those two games really can go either way, and then same thing with Miami. I think, Miami probably will be favored by a field goal or maybe like 4 points or less, so you never know, but all these games are 50-50 games that really can go either way. So a total of about 8 50-50 games here in this schedule for Syracuse for 2025. So what does the projection come out to be here for 2025 for Syracuse based on how tough this schedule is? Well, we count the 2 green games as wins, and then you average out these 2 yellow games where Syracuse is an underdog in by 40%, and then you average out all these 50-50 games at 50%. Let's say they split these 50-50 games. Let's say they probably win 4 out of the 8 50-50 games. That's going to give you 4 more wins, including those 2 green games against UConn and Colgate. So that does give you a total of 6 wins, which means the projection comes out to be 6-6 for Syracuse for 2025. So a little bit of a lower projection compared to last year for the Orange. Again, this schedule is a lot tougher compared to last year. Again, Tennessee and Notre Dame in the non-conference, and then you got some tough road games with Notre Dame, Miami, and Clemson. So yeah, all these games are pretty tough here on the schedule for Syracuse, but you look at the rest of the games that are in the 50-50 range, including Miami, these are all winnable games here for Syracuse. So I think best case probably is 7-5 for this team, and then worst case, probably not making it to a bowl game at 5-7. But with this projection, my projection says they barely make it to a bowl game, and they do go 6-6 in 2025. Again, this is not a projection, it's simply, or actually not a prediction, this is simply a projection based on how tough this schedule schedule is and based off of how the teams finished from last year. So that is my projection for Syracuse for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree? And give me your thoughts about Syracuse's schedule down in the comments below. Is it tough or not so tough? Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.